What I'd like to look at quickly is an item in your network that hopefully you do have it. If you don't have it, take some time and look at the components and how you can do this very quickly. Is a honeypot. Many years ago, it was also known as a mousetrap. But a honeypot purely is a device or system running in your network pretending to be systems that are weak in security features. So they are compromisable. But it just pretends to be, it's not. So it is there basically to trap people looking at your network, trying to hack in your network, internal or external. And what I'm going to do here quickly is just look at the dashboard of an open source or community edition developed by T-Systems from Germany and making this available as an ISO download, and you can configure it yourself. Now, what I've done here is purely looking at the last 30 days. You can auto refresh it depending on how often you want to look at it. So if you do have a dashboard for a SOC or a security operations center, you can put it there and it gives you very good information. Now, as you can see here, we've got certain attacks. We've got nearly about 5 million attacks on the outside on a single IP that it's sitting on my premises. And what I'm going to look at here is purely the information that you can glean from this free system that you have in the network. Now, when I look a little bit deeper, I'm going to look specifically at the RDP or Remote Data Protocol, which is the Microsoft Terminal Server. As you hopefully know, or your security team, that there has been a real risk around this where people could compromise your remote access if it was exposed to the internet. Now, as you can see here, it actually shows us the amount of attacks during a time period. Now, this actually every 12 hours. So I've broken it up in every 12 hours. So this is the amount of attacks per 12 hours. Here we have nearly 500,000 attacks within that 12 hours. And here the number of unique source IPs, in this case, is 237 unique IPs. We do have a map to show us where the actual attack originates from, and these red little is the concentration where it comes from. So as you can see, there's actually from Europe, and we'll see the country specifically. Further on, if we look at this, these are the different ports that are being attacked. 1433. That is definitely Microsoft SQL. We've got 5900, which is VNC. 22, which is your secure connection via your SSH. 443 and 80, of course, your web server, so they will actually look at that as well. This graph shows us the countries where the attacks are coming from. So if we're looking at Russia, for example, you can look at the timeline in the 30 days of the activity. If we look at Ireland, also what's happening there. Then further on, it will tell you that it's a known attacker. So there's a large portion of known attackers. We've got bad reputation. So those aren't really attackers, but they are coming up in the line that people might be just sitting in a network and scanning you possibly from home and so on. Then we've got bot crawlers and so on. Now, the next one here, we actually just the type of attacks we saw right in the top there. But here, the operating system distribution, one that we don't know what it is, so it cannot determine it based on the actual signature coming in. Windows 7 or 8 being the highest. Then we've got Linux, etc., etc. Attacks by country, very similar to that, but just in a circle diagram. This is the actual attacks. For example, if you look at 1433, which is Microsoft SQL, we can see that Russia actually has approximately a 69% attack from there. 5900, this is a real big problem that we have. Now, 5900 is VNC, which is remote network, and usually the password is not controlled in a central environment. What the activity you see as well is the type of network activity. For example, on this time period, we had miscellaneous activity. We know it's potentially bad traffic, attempted administrator access, not suspicious traffic, and then general protocol. So it actually gives you an idea of what is happening inside or outside on your network. I think the next one is actually very interesting. So this is the tag cloud. A tag cloud is just to show you which users, if you see it in capital letters or a larger font, that's highly used. So SA usually is the system administrator user within Microsoft SQL. And as you can see, the actual attacks are using SA, and the password support admin or user as the most common combination. People trying to get mostly into Microsoft SQL. So this is an attack where they would like to get into Microsoft SQL and actually look at your data, possibly copy your data, and then do extortion and possibly ransomware and so on. But what we can actually see from all the users that they're actually using here, you just look at that and actually make sure that you don't have any of these default users in your system. For example, administrator, that's usually in the Microsoft environment, and then administrator, and then what passwords are being normally used. As you can see here, ABC 123456 is a common one. The 123456 these, as you have seen previously when we look at password audits, these are common. So the guys actually possibly get into a lot of systems worldwide. And then finally, within the dashboard, it will tell you where the attacks come from, which country, the source IP, the actual CVE or the common vulnerability interface, what is being exploited. And then here within the network, you can see one of the biggest attacks in this network actually is trying to get into a remote control or virtual network computing, the VNC server. There's Microsoft SQL, as I said that. And this gives you a very good indication. Now this, if you have it on the outside, which I have here, is a very good indication of different actors from the outside trying to get in. So it actually shows you your threat, your whole threat landscape on the outside. What I would suggest here is to actually put it in the inside, and there you will actually find and catch people that actually sniffing around your network trying to get into systems. It is very, very effective. Now, the only problem that I find sometimes with a honeypot is that when I discuss in a consulting engagement session, that people would sit back and say, no, but this increases our risk, because they don't understand the way the honeypot works. You should have a honeypot in your network to understand the actual threats out there. Now, let's get back to the RDP. Let me just show you the actual risk here. Now, one of the clients I actually looked at, and I will use, so this is Teapot, is actually an open source or a community edition. And then the other one I will use is a vulnerability scanner, which is called OpenVAS. And what I am doing here, I'm going to go into some of these clients. I've always blurred these out so you can't actually see the actual problem that we actually have. Now, actually, we'll go into this client here. And what this has seen, now, if you see here, the initial finding that I had with this client was on October the 7th. Now today is the 27th of February, so it's a few months later. It shows you that at this scan, that actual threat that I've identified is CVE 2019-0708. And as you look at here, this is remote code execution vulnerability. It was known as Bluekeep, and this is the remote desktop services, your RDP. So it actually tells me here that it's very high, and it's sitting on port 3397 and not normally like 3398. So the client has changed that to think that they actually remove this vulnerability from the internet, but scanners out there are definitely picking this up. Now, as indicated, it was the 7th of October, which I've identified that they have this risk. And the first time I actually saw that it is out the environment was February the 26th. Now, it could be that the client has fixed it, because as you can see, there are some business applications in the back end with very high threats still available. But what some hackers have done, they have identified weaknesses, they compromise the system, and then they close it so nobody else can get in, but they have a back door. So without actually sitting with a client and actually looking at if they have patched this, I can assume one of two things. One, they fixed it, which I presume is not the case, or the other one, that it's been compromised and the hacker has taken and opened a backdoor for him, so he's got full-on access to this. Now, you may ask yourself, now this is two open source applications. How do people find out what is available out there? Now, there is another, there's a Shodan.io, which is a Google for hackers. Now, what I will do is purely have a look in and log into this environment. And then what I will do is looking at RDP, which is Remote Data Protocol. And as you can see, just by this, it gives me 964, and it will tell you, for example, Russia. We've got a server there that we can get in. Here's another server in Vietnam where the administrators sign in, and there's an RDP user. So as you can see, it is very simple to actually go to a search engine like this and being able to possibly compromise the systems. Now, this is with the license I've got, you could actually look at and say, listen, yes, I could do numerous scans, not limited. Now, also what we can do, for example, here, let's look at RDP, but change the country to South Africa and see what we can see there. Now, we're not going to break into these, of course, but this is purely a demonstration. So here we've got in Cape Town, the company that's there, they've got running RDP on the service, and as you can see here, you are open for possible compromise. Now, after looking at the honeypot and how easy it is to see what you've got on the outside, what is your mitigating factors that you actually have to do here? The first step I would do is actually look at your asset management. What have you got out there? Do you have a team, your security team, along with your risk management team, to make sure that you are confirming and logging everything? Do you know what's on the outside? Sometimes get an external party to do a quick review to make sure that your security stance in your organization is adequate. One of my previous engagements, and while there's two things that I can identify with, is that the CIO posed me the question that, listen, how does my company look like? And this was a large organization with a few thousands of objects all over the country. And my comment basically like say, listen, the information or the message from the bottom is not coming through the top. You actually have a layer that protects the top management or the board level from the actual real truth. And one of his comments he always would say is like, he wouldn't trust sometimes people that come and do the work because if they don't have the adequate skills. So that's why it's important to get people that have got a good track record and have got the proper knowledge in the environment. His statement was, which would always stuck with me, is that a fool with a tool is still a fool. So you might have an auditor, external auditor coming in with a tool and a checklist, and they run a script and actually write based on their checklist, meaning that sometimes things may be required in the environment and that their recommendations is not in line with the business requirement, purely because they are auditors and don't understand the business. Like I said, a checklist auditor at the end of the day. So it's very important to make sure that you actually have a view on this. Use usually a standard framework that you can actually use. For example, the ISO 27000. We actually have the NIST cybersecurity framework. We've got the Stride model from Microsoft. We've got Octave. There are so many frameworks that you can select from, and at least it is just take the step and have a look at your environment. Take a checklist yourself and make sure that people are doing their jobs.